Okay, so in the previous video, we set up our get me method as well as our send message, which accepts a chat ID as well as a text, and then makes our HTTP calls to the Telegram's API and sends a message to a user. And just as a reminder, get me was to test whether our auth token was valid or not. Um, One more thing that I forgot to do here is when we get a result from our post request when sending a message. One thing we could do is call result.raise for status, which would basically raise an exception when our response status code is not 200. So if it's not a successful message, it will raise an exception or Python exception and tell us that something failed. So later on we can catch this. So what we're gonna do today in this video is that now we can send a message and we'll see if our auth token is valid or not and get some info about our bot. But the main thing that we wanted to be able to do is to be able to receive a message from our bot. So let's say I go to Telegram, send a message to this bot. We want our bot to be able to receive this message and do something according to the message that it got. So that brings us to this getting updates part of their the bot API. So if I go to the top, after the authorizing your bot and making requests, the next part is getting updates. So there are two ways of accepting updates. One is with webhooks and the other is with get updates. The difference is with get updates, we're making long pulls to the API. So so the idea is that your client running on a server, it could be your computer, could be a Raspberry Pi, calls the a Telegram API and asks us for like, is there any updates that my bot has received, and then it could take it a couple of seconds depending on a timeout that we'll get to later that you have defined, and then Telegram returns you either nothing or returns you a bunch of updates. This is the long polling version that we're going to do right now. The second version is using webhooks, and what webhooks are is that you tell the API that, hey, I have a web server running over here, and by web server I mean anything that would accept a HTTP request. Here's its URL. So whenever there's a new message going to our bot, Telegram would make a HTTP call to your web server and tell you that, hey, this is a new update. So basically, if you think about it, the difference is that on long polls, you're making a get request to Telegram saying, hey, is there any updates? On webhooks, Telegram makes a post request to you and tells you, hey, there's an update. And the main difference to why would you want to use either one is that, well, first of all, webhooks are much more efficient because you would only get a HTTP call when there's an actual update. You wouldn't be repeatedly asking for updates. But the problem is that you would need a static IP, which would be like either a domain, and it should be using SSL, so it should be HTTPS. So, for example, on my personal computer, I don't have a static IP and I don't have SSL running, so there is no way I can ask Telegram to send me a HTTP request. Well, there are different like workarounds to using maybe message queues and then setting up a main server somewhere that would just relay your messages. But for now, we would have to use get updates. So let's go to get updates. And then what this is that they make a call to this get updates method. It should be a get request. And then it will return us a list of update objects. So going to update objects, we can see there's an update ID, message ID, edit message, channel post, a bunch of stuff that we want here. We'll take a look at these later. And then it takes a number of items that we want to receive each time. There's a timeout, which would say like, you have this amount of time to process this before my request times out. And then one interesting thing is that, well, if you give it a 0, it means instantly give me whatever you have. But it says short polling should be used for testing purposes only. So for when you're running a a bot in production for your, let's say, whatever use you have, you should give it a longer amount of time, and you have to make sure your request library doesn't time out the HTTP calls. So limits, timeout, and offset. Offset is the identifier of the first update to be returned. Basically, when you make an update, it returns you a list of updates, and each update has an update ID. So, for example, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. If you have a limit of 4 items returned, so next time you make another request, you have to pass it the new offset. So, for example, you have a list. Let me just use this. So, let's say your first call we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Second call, we would want to ask for 5, 6, 7, 8. But to tell Telegram that we want this, your update or offset should be 5. Basically, the last ID that we got plus 1. So 4 plus 1. Sorry. 4 plus. Should have used a comment here. Alright, and what I'm going to do is increase the font size here, so hopefully it will be easier to read. Okay, so that's the main idea of what we're going to do right now. Now, what I have in mind is to add a function here that would call get updates only once. And then later on, when we have tested it and make sure it's working, we would make a loop of our which would be our main loop, and it would constantly be asking for updates, and it would be processing those updates as they come in. So in this video, we're going to set this get updates, and later on we will get on to making the loop. Alright, so let's start by defining this function def get updates, and then we want to pass it a offset limit. Actually, I forgot self again. Self offset limit timeout, and we don't really care about allow updates anymore. I mean, right now. Okay, so let's give it a default value. So our offset should be none. Our limit, let's just give it a 10 for now. We can change this later and give it a timeout of like 3 or 5 seconds. So we can add a timeout here, 5 seconds for default, and then okay. So let's create this URL again. Oh, actually, we don't want to create a URL. So we want to make this call. Let's comment this again. So saying that this is our use to receive updates using long polling. And then for params we have offset, starting update ID, limit, number of results, and timeout. Timeout is seconds for long polling time, seconds. And then we want to return an array of updates. Alright, so results would be again self get request. Our method would be get updates, and then now we have to add params here. So again, let's make this multi-line so it's easier to understand. And then here would say params is params. Alright. We can do the same here, so in case we want to change it later on. Perfect. Now that we have our get updates method, we want to pass it a list of params. So our parameters are offset offset. You know, let's create this outside. So and then timeout. I need to turn this. I don't know which plugin it is, but it's getting really annoying right now. So let's see if I can turn it off somewhere. I will do that for next video. So sorry about it now. Timeout. And then our parameters will come up here. Params. Let's give it a limit. Let's give it a timeout. And then let's give it a let's give it an offset if our offset is not none. So if offset is not none, or you can do if offset, but this is more easy to understand. Params offset equals offset. Alright, now the next thing that I want to point out is over here, see, we have a timeout, and then you may ask why we're passing this timeout twice to our get request. Once it's inside the parameters, once it's inside the actual arguments for our function call. And the reason is that we want both our request library and Telegram to know what the timeout is, so we need to pass it twice. But the next thing is we would want to add a little more to this get request. So let's say Telegram takes the entire 5 seconds, and for some latency in the time that it takes our request to get there and come back, we hit the 5 seconds. We don't want the request to think it has timed out while it was actually taking the entire 5 seconds. So let's just add 1 more second, or you can do 2, it doesn't matter, just to make sure you don't time out the API call. And then finally, let's pretty print the result for now. And then here we can also do result erase for status. Okay, now we can test it and see if it works or not. So send a message, we can comment this out, and we can do bot get updates. Alright, so let's run this, and here we go. We got a bunch of updates here. So in result we got a message, and if we go back to our update object, we see update object has message, edit message, channel post, edit channel post, inline query. So any sort of update that may come would be shown here. So for now we would just want to use messages. And then what was our timeout again? I forgot what we put as a timeout. So our timeout, limit was 10, and we received 2 messages over here. We received a hi and a start. So now let's extract this and return a list of updates instead of this okay true. I mean, we're not returning anything just yet, but the idea is to, instead of this, return result JSON and then get message. Get result. And then if result doesn't exist, well, actually, let's see. So if our update, is empty, so we can just test that. And let me just comment this out for now. Let's just print this result JSON again, and see our message ID, or actually update ID. Where's update ID? Here we go. Our update ID was, this is the last update ID. So if we go and, did I add the, actually it was called offset. So +1. If we get the next one, what are we going to get? So yeah, of course it's going to time out for the amount of timeout that we gave it, and it's going to return us an empty array, meaning that we don't have any updates. But now if I send it another message, how are you, and run this thing again, it should now get this. Perfect. And it gave us a new update ID. So here we would just want to return result. That would be an array of updates, and here we can just process each one. So for example, if we define a processor, so define process update, and then we say print, okay, if update, we want to make sure it's a message, right? So if message not an update, print not a message update, and return. But if it is a message update, as I said, it could be edit message, channel post. Well, we just want to use message now. And let's see what message looks like. So message ID from date and then text. So let's print got a message from sender. It would be update message from first name. I'm following this. So we have message, inside message we have from first name. That would be this. We can have it, actually let's just call this first name. Let's have a username, update message username, actually from username, so from username, and then text was update message text. So I'll just return this new message from username, and then let's just say text. So let's run this again, and then since this returns us an array, so we say result equals, get rid of this, bot get updates, and then for updates in result, or you could directly do for update in bot.get updates, process update. Now let's give this another try. New message from that dev, how are you? And you may be asking, why did we receive this message twice? Because I didn't send any messages to it since the last time that we received this over here. And that is because in their API that they mentioned that identifier for the first update, the offset is the identifier for the first update to be returned. But over here it says let's see. Okay, an update is considered confirmed as soon as get updates is called with an offset higher than its update ID. So basically, since we haven't made a new call higher than this previous update ID, which was here, we're just asking for the default, and the default is the last unconfirmed update. So we never confirmed this message. So as long as we don't confirm it, anytime that we run it, we're gonna get the same thing. So if I send it a bunch of more messages, sorry, oof. How are you? Hey, hello. We should be getting all of these now, as you can see over here. All right. Hopefully you learned something new in this video. Let me also erase this because we don't need it. I will upload the code so far to a Git repository, and I would put a link to it so you can access it and either read the code or copy it, or maybe go through it one more time. Again, hopefully you learned something. I hope these videos are helpful, and if you're enjoying it, please like and subscribe.